Our common data elements section was from the working group on physiology and big data. And we focused on the types of data that can be collected in a continuous and regular fashion, sometimes even at a waveform resolution in the neuro ICU. And those types of ICU big data are really well suited for artificial intelligence research. Physiological measurements are the quantification of biological processes, such as like your heart beating or your lungs and diaphragm breathing or your brain braining. And taken over time, these measurements can reveal reactions to either stimuli or progression to disease or even progression to health. Big data is sort of a term that's in evolution, and there are lots of different definitions floating around. But in general, it refers to data sets that require parallel computing or too large or complex to be analyzed using kind of traditional data processing software. But in the context of physiological measurements, high fidelity data collection results in rather large and complex data sets and waveforms that can reveal underlying biological function. The choice of authors was super thoughtful in terms of the approach, and we thought it was important to ensure both a deep and a broad representation of this knowledge area. And we wanted to be as representative and inclusive of the standards that exist out there. And also we wanted people who were well positioned to speak on the future potential uses of the data. So I invited 13 authors across 4 countries and 4 different time zones, actually. And it wasn't all MDs. In fact, there were 4 non-MDs. One, Dick Moberg, who everyone knows, whose product enabled the collection of this type of data for many. Peter Smoleski, whose software enabled the collection of this type of data for many others. Zhao Hu, who's a biomedical engineer who's made a huge impact in computational health sciences within the neurocritical care community, especially around signal processing and deep learning. And he also happens to be the editor-in-chief for the journal Physiological Measurements. He was very well positioned for this task. Peter Hu, unrelated to Zhao Hu, is a computer scientist who develops machine learning algorithms for prediction using physiologic data in neurocritical care. We then had 9 physician scientists, in addition to myself, Erda Beccari, Neeraj Bhatia, Ari Erkeli, Brandon Foreman, Carrie La Rivere, Geert Meifreud, Chiara Roba, Eric Rosenthal, and Mark Wainwright, whose research makes the significant use of this type of physiological data and or data science in neurocritical care, and 2 of whom were pediatric neurointensivists. So I thought we did a good job of being as representative as we could while keeping the group size manageable. We met about 6 times virtually and iterated continuously. We framed out where the core data elements and aspirational data elements were. And we found that actually for our type of data, nearly all were aspirational or for special use cases. So we really embraced this opportunity to agree on a standard way of representing this type of aspirational data elements. And I should mention that Erda Beccari, who was an anesthesiologist, was completing her PhD at the time and did the lion's share of drafting the manuscript, but everyone really contributed a ton and was very invested in the process. Specifically in the context of physiological data and big data, patients with disorders of consciousness can experience secondary brain injury silently. In other words, we rely on interrogation to discover these events. But interrogation can really only occur once a suspicion arises. So this situation begs for a monitor to enable alerting clinicians either for a secondary brain injury that may be happening or to even just be suspicious for it and to interrogate. And our multimodal monitors are really able to help us detect the secondary brain injury on a threshold-based way. But there's promise in the integration and second-order processing of the data to predict short and even long-term outcomes. Short-term outcomes maybe being more actionable and potentially reveal even more subtle signals of secondary brain injury that the monitors themselves in their raw data format really cannot at the moment. As we were discovering, there were no data elements that we felt applied to our section that had to do with the general core, disease core, or basic common data elements. Because none of these monitoring devices or even high frequency data is necessarily required for all studies or all VOC studies, or could be even, say, strongly recommended for all studies. And so all of our relevant, we did like a broad search of existing CDEs. We found relevant CDEs from previously proposed supplemental CDEs, specifically two. One was the vital signs and acute physiological measurements one from the unruptured aneurysms and subarachnoid hemorrhage CDE effort. And the second one was the vital signs and blood gases for traumatic brain injury. And we used these as seeds for discussion, but ended up not including any of them in our CDEs because they were not structured to reflect the complexity of waveform level data, or they were just not adaptable enough to capture all the variables we sought to cover. And so we started from scratch, but we did use those as seeds to sort of do a survey of what was existing out there. We ended up with 61 novel elements, and they fell in what is called the key design elements. So these are not CDEs, but they specify methodological parameters. But they looked very much, we sort of created them to mirror the structure of common data elements. So these were all thought to be rather suitable for observational clinical research using multimodal monitors, physiological monitors, and for big data. And we conceptually divided each physiological modality into three sections. So one was speaking of the variables themselves, so which clinical variable we're talking about. The second was the technical aspects of getting that data, which we felt was very important for understanding the context of the data that you were collecting and later using for observational clinical research. And the third section was the clinical reasoning that impacted the collection of that data. And so in those three sections, it was about equally spaced, but about 20-ish per section. And that made up the 61 novel key design elements. The other side was we called exploratory KDEs, so exploratory key design elements. And we got about 23 of those. And how a key design element ended up in this category rather than the just the key design elements category was that we felt that there was maybe not enough literature to support the effort, but that it was important to kind of start to set standards for future research. So that's how those ended up in there. These common data elements or key design elements for physiology and big data are free. They're available right now. You can download them from Zenodo. I would ask that you focus on the 61 novel key design elements and really look at the 23 exploratory KDEs more as a thoughtful exercise for future standards. And then in terms of other things that I'd want you to know about this is that, you know, one of the things we could not include in the key design elements around this area is that the knowledge of reliability and accuracy of physiological measurements is super relevant for clinical research and oftentimes is lacking in our understanding when we just have data to share. And so having that standardized metric of reliability or quality of each of the measurements would be super desirable for future research. So the scientific community should be very interested in investigating these types of methods and metrics.